Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. As we may have determined, this is the first all BIC meeting. I think it all started in an idea in Pat's head a couple of years ago, and it only took, a year and a half or so to actually pull it off. So for all that don't know me, I'm Steve Brower. I am the broker in charge of the Chapel Hill office for Coldwell Banker Advantage. I've been here about 3 years. That means in my effective age is somewhere probably in the 90s now. Each year is at least a dog's year. So with that being said, we have Bill Gifford here today. I'm going to read some of his bio. Bill is currently in Winston-Salem. He's with Martin and Gifford. I would assume that numerous of you have talked to Bill in the past, or certainly your agents have too. But Bill is, well, we're going to call him a local guy because he graduated from UNC Law. We won't say the year. It was, last year, right, Bill?
It was a while ago.
But he's with Martin and Gifford over there in Winston-Salem. But if any of you have used the legal hotline or the NCAR, Bill could be one of the people that would call you back or email you or answer your question. So we feel very fortunate to have him here today. And he's going to talk about some things that a lot of us are dealing with right now. And the goal is to talk about these topics in ways that come up for you as broker in charges and how you can counsel your agents in this regard. So at least I think that's what you're going to talk about, Bill. So we're going to turn it over to you, Bill, and thanks a lot.
Okay. Well, I see that almost everybody here is muted, and I know that you when you sent me the email, the way you described it said you hoped it would be a discussion, and so I hope it is a discussion. I know that we've got a group on here that's all brokers in charge, so people that are experienced, and so I'd like to we're dealing with we're talking about things that Steve has brought up that I think are issues that you guys are facing, and I'd like to hear how these issues relate to you. If you have specific questions, Steve has brought up a couple of specific situations that he wants me to talk about. The three things he mentioned to me, multiple offers, handling of monies, and then the NAR versus Department of Justice settlement. So I'm prepared to talk about all three of those. Just a little brief bit about me, more than what Cub said. I do have a lot of history in your area. I went to law school there, graduated in 1980. So quite a while ago. Chapel Hill was a little bit of a different place, but I fell in love with it. I met my wife there. I'm a native New Yorker, but my mom ended up moving to Chapel Hill after I'd already graduated and moved to Chicago. And so I ended up coming to Chapel Hill an awful lot. Then both of my daughters ended up going to school in Chapel Hill. And so I just, I'm very familiar with your area. I love it. So we handle the legal hotline. I see a lot of names on this that are here today that I know I've talked to on the hotline, and then plenty of you I have not, but hopefully I'll talk to you sometime in the future. Or, we're here to provide guidance, not just to get you out of trouble, but maybe to keep you out of trouble. So the first subject, let me talk a little bit about multiple offers. Just some basics with multiple offers, some sort of true false things, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands or answers, but and I think probably all of you know this stuff, but it doesn't help to remind you of it. And then I'm going to talk about a specific scenario that Steve brought up, and maybe you've got some that you want to talk about as well. First thing, the existence of multiple offers, is it a material fact that a listing agent must disclose to competing buyers? And the answer to that is no, it is not a material fact. And in fact, it is a fact that listing agents should not disclose unless they get the consent of their seller clients. This is in the Code of Ethics Standard of Practice 1-15 is where the rule is. And it states that realtors, in response to inquiries from buyers or cooperating brokers, shall, with the seller's approval, disclose the existence of offers on the property. Why is that rule there? Some sellers believe, and maybe with good reason, that if buyers knew that they were in a competition, they might decide not to compete. They might not want to make an offer. And so some sellers choose to keep that information confidential. I mean, having this conversation today when multiple offers are so common, I mean, I imagine most buyers these days assume that they're in a multiple offer situation. But nevertheless, it is not something that a listing agent should be disclosing without having a conversation with their client. What if you're a listing agent and a buyer agent asks you if there are other offers out there? Are you ethically bound to be honest and tell them? And you think that the answer might be yes, that you need to be honest, but the answer is no, because it's the same rule as I just said. This is not something that you are permitted to disclose without the consent of your client. So I'm not telling you to lie. You can't not tell the truth, but you can say, I need to check with my client, or I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. But without your client's authority, that is not something that you should answer. Another question that comes up: if the seller authorizes you to do so, is it okay for you to disclose the terms of another buyer's offer? And the answer to that question is no. And this is governed by the shopping of offers rule. It's a real estate commission rule, and it's Rule 115. And the rule states that brokers shall not disclose the price or other material terms contained in a party's offer without the express authority of that party, of the offering party. Well, I can assure you that buyer one is never going to authorize you to tell buyer two what their offer is. So there is no real exception to this rule. You can never disclose that. And this is going to come up again. Cub forwarded a question to me that came up that he wants me to address. I'll be talking about it later, about escalation clauses. And this is an issue that comes up with escalation clauses because when there's an escalation clause, you might have an offer that says, I'll pay $1,000 more than the competing offer. And so you tell that buyer, well, you're the successful bidder. And they say, well, how do I know that how do I know what the other offer is that I'm paying, let's say, $1,000 more? And can you disclose that? And it's not really clear that you can. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you're certainly, if you're in a competition, it can't be disclosed. If the competition is over, there's a question, maybe it can be disclosed, but there's another way to skin that cat. We can talk about that in a little bit. Another one of the general rules, if you're in a multiple offer situation and you get a lot of offers, and your client, your seller client, is looking for the highest offer they can get, and some of the offers come in and they're low, can you just reject them without even forwarding them on to your client? And you probably all know that the answer to that is no. There's a real estate commission rule. It's rule 106 that says, that you basically must submit all offers to your client. You're not a filter. You can't decide which offers are worthy of your client's consideration. All of them have to be submitted. And specifically the rule, I think there used to be a 5-day period of time to do that. Now it's 3 days. But the real estate commission really expects you to do it immediately. The 3 days is sort of a safe harbor. You got to do it within that period of time, but there's really no reason not to do it immediately. And then the last sort of the general rule is what if there are multiple offers from you're a buyer agent and you've got 2 clients that want to submit offers on the same property? Is that something that you're permitted to do? And this is something that probably, again, you may already know that you probably already know this. This is specifically covered in the buyer agency agreement. I think it's paragraph 5, at least it used to be paragraph 5 of the buyer agency agreement, where there's language that says the buyer understands that you as the buyer agent or the firm as the may represent other buyers that are interested in the same property, and that it is perfectly permissible for you to submit offers on both buyers. What should you do if you're in that situation? You're being put in a tough situation. How do you represent both of your clients zealously? Our recommendation is that you should immediately disclose to both of those buyers that there are 2 clients of yours or of the firms that are submitting offers on this property. But you should not, as I mentioned earlier, you should not be disclosing to the buyers what your other client is offering on the property or any of the other terms. The general rule with multiple offers is you got to treat all the parties fairly, equally, honestly. If you do those things, you're not going to be in trouble with the real estate commission. That's the general rule. So let me turn to a specific scenario, and it's the one that Steve brought up, and it presents some different sort of a little bit more difficult issues. Let's say you're a broker in charge. That doesn't require a lot of imagination because I think all of you are brokers in charge. And you've got one of your agents, we'll say the agent's name is Al, and he has a listing agreement with some sellers. And like every listing these days, there's tons of interest in this listing. And one of the interested buyers is also Al's client. That's buyer, we'll call that buyer 1. And let's say there's only one other offer out, or one other interested buyer. That buyer is represented by an outside agent, and we'll call that buyer 2. So let's say Al receives, as a listing agent, he receives an offer from buyer 2 and presents it to the seller, and it's the initial offer. So there's not a multiple offer situation. But then buyer 1 tells Al that she wants to submit an offer for the listing. And she asks Al if there are any other offers out there on the property. How should Al and how should you as the BIC handle this situation? I've already said that Al cannot tell his client that there's a multiple offer situation without the seller's consent. Just because Al knows it doesn't mean that buyer 1 knows it. And buyer, he can't, this is information, that he might feel he has a fiduciary obligation to give to his client, but he can't, not without the seller's permission. What about telling buyer 2 and buyer 2's agent that that there are multiple offers? Again, not without the seller's consent. And if the seller does consent, then I suppose then it would be fine. I mean, a question, you might have a question in this situation. Is it even okay for Al to continue representing buyer one? Isn't there some risk that if there's a competition and buyer two doesn't get the property and they find out that buyer one gets the property because it's reported in the MLS, and they find out that Al was a single agent, dual agent, isn't buyer two and the agent going to be upset? And Steve Brower told me that he's got a certain way that he handles this. He either will step in perhaps and present both offers to the seller. Sometimes he might step in and represent the buyer, Al's buyer client. But our view is that that's not absolutely required. The general rules here still apply. I mean, single agent, dual agency is troublesome, problematic all the time. There's lots of firms that don't allow it. There's lots of firms that don't even engage in regular dual agency. They insist on designated dual agency. And I mean, I think designated dual agency in this situation would be a good idea, but it's not mandatory. The one thing that you got to realize is there is language in both the listing agreement and the buyer agency agreement where and obviously keep in mind that this whole situation can't arise unless both the sellers and Al's buyer client have consented to dual agency. I mean, if they haven't consented to dual agency, there's a problem. But if they have, the paragraphs in both agency agreements have language where the parties acknowledge that the agent and the firm may have information that's confidential that might be of benefit to them, but that the firm and that the agent are not in a position to reveal to them. So they have already accepted the fact that the firm and the agent are not going to be able to provide the full kind of advocacy and advisory services that they would normally get. The Real Estate Commission has written about this situation. They say dual agency effectively become more neutralized in their advisory and advocacy capacity unless the firm practices designated dual agency. So to provide full service to your client, you really can't do it in this situation. And of course, even if it's not multiple offer situation, if you're a dual agent, you are really limited in your ability to provide advice to your buyer client. If they want to make an offer, you can't tell them what terms to fill in. You can't suggest a price to them. I suppose, you could do a broker price opinion for both parties and share it with both parties, but you can't tell them what terms to put in terms of price, due diligence fee, anything else. So, I think if you're in a situation like this and the sellers consent to disclosing the existence of multiple offers, I think you should disclose the existence of multiple offers. I think you can certainly consider the tax that Steve has taken to try to help. I think to provide your buyer client with the best service, I think the best thing you can do is refer that matter to your broker, to the broker in charge, or to another broker in the firm, and that way everybody's getting full representation. So that's the way I would handle it. I don't know, Steve, if you've got any reaction to that, or if anybody else does, I'd be happy to hear what you think.
Well, it's interesting, I'm sure everyone here got an email, I don't know if it was yesterday, from the commission asking about what kind of agency training we're doing in our office now. And it makes me wonder if something's coming down the road. I think caution is always the better way to go. We had one in our office where not only did they bring the buyer on their own listing, they had agreed to take a reduced commission. Now, fortunately, that was also disclosed in MLS, but I'm going to tell you that the agents that were bringing offers were not happy that, that could give them an advantage, the listing agent an advantage over them. So.
Right. Interestingly, the one thing that's come up is sometimes that dual variable rate commission arrangement is something that may not even exist at the outset, but it can be negotiated during the course of the transaction. And we've actually been in touch with some of the folks at NAR to see if they feel like that's something that needs to be disclosed mid-transaction. And interestingly, they said it was not.
Wow.
So, a variable rate commission does have to, is something that needs to be disclosed up front if that's part of your original listing agreement. So, and I'd be interested to hear from anybody else who wants to weigh in on if you've handled a similar situation, what your experience is with it. I would think with multiple offers, this is something that's coming up. Everybody's muted, Steve. I don't know, or who's.
I don't know.
So you bring up such a good point, because during the review of offers in a multiple offer situation, a client is very likely, the seller is very likely to turn to their agent, their listing agent, and say, well, you're bringing me the buyer. Will you, you're going to be getting all this money. Would you reduce your commission on my side? And so, and if you do, I will accept this offer. And, I always grapple with that, because it seems so unfair to all of the other offers to do that at that time.
Yeah, this came up years ago with NAR, and NAR said, that there was not a violation of MLS rules, and it was not, it's basically, that's an MLS rule that requires the disclosure of variable rate commissions, and they said they didn't feel it would be a violation.
Well, they haven't, no one's maybe sued yet. There's a lot of people out there not getting houses right now that we certainly have lots of buyer clients in our office that are not happy that they keep losing. So,
Right.
it could change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what you said, because standard of practice 3-4, and I hate to put on my professional standards hat, says realtors acting as listing brokers have an affirmative obligation to disclose the existence of dual or variable rate commission arrangements. The listing broker shall, as soon as practical, disclose the existence of such arrangement to potential cooperating brokers, and shall, in response to inquiries from cooperating brokers, disclose the differential that would result in a cooperative transaction or a sale that results to the sale of the seller. So that's the standard practice 3-4. So if you do change in the middle, it would seem to me that you do have a responsibility to say to everyone, well, hey, whoa, we're agreeing now to a lower commission. You need to be aware of that, because it says as soon as practically possible. So I just throw that out as from the professional standards reading on that.
Right.
So,
Well,
Pat, where do we
Yes.
get that document?
That's Code of Ethics Standard of Practice 3-4.
So that's readily available to even people like me.
It's really available even to people like you.
okay. Yeah, as part of the Code of Ethics. Yeah.
So I have a question about that, though, because I'm very familiar, of course, with that standard of practice. However, when you are in conversations with your seller and the seller says, I want to put a stop to all of these offers. I'm happy with this offer. If you reduce your commission. I don't want you to disclose this to anybody else. This is what I want to do. And I don't want to discuss any of the other offers. This one's fine. Now what do we do?
Well, Pat, you've got the experience on professional standards committee. I don't, but I will tell you that this, we struggled with this, and that's why we got in touch with the folks at NAR to ask them about it. And they basically said that in that scenario, you are not violating, and I guess I forgot that this was, I believe this language in standard practice 3-4 is also in the MLS rules. And they basically said you're not violating, this would not be a violation to go ahead and do a deal along those lines. If you've got an agreement and you're upfront, you've got to disclose it, no doubt.
Well, I would think that
Treat it
if you,
all fairly then, though.
yeah. Well, you're not required to treat all parties fairly under the code of ethics. You're required to treat all parties honestly, which is a slightly different standard, which sometimes people get a little confused by. The difference between treating fairly and treating honestly may not be the same. We sometimes have fun with that. But I would think that the scenario that Jessica is laying out, and I'm trying to, I've got several case interpretations I can scroll through because it's been a topic a lot. I would think of the situation where it's part of the final agreement where you're agreeing to that, it's fine. But if they came back to you and said, well, would you consider, if we agreed to X price, would you consider a reduction of your commission to X percent? And you had to then go back to the buyer for this new price. I would think at that point that you would be responsible for disclosing to other realtors that there is a change in the variable commission rate because you do not yet have an accepted agreement. So
yeah. I wouldn't disagree with that. I wouldn't disagree with that.
So I mean, we're cutting a fine line there. Bottom line is variable rates definitely need to be disclosed as soon as practically possible. And you need to disclose what that differential is according to the standard of practice. So if you're taking 1% less or 2% less because you're doing a dual agency transaction, that's certainly something that you have to disclose as well.
And you have to tell the buyer that it's going to be effective, right?
Yes, because under Georgia law, this might be, under North Carolina law, it would seem that you're required to tell the buyer what your compensation is going to be, particularly if they have a listing agreement that says they're agreeing to pick up the difference. And a buyer agency agreement, they're agreeing to pay you if it's less than the stated amount in the buyer agency agreement, but not quite sure. Don't want to go down that mouse hole right now.
I think I do everything I can to stay out of this mess.
Let me just throw one other thing out there. This is a little bit of a change of subject, but still on the multiple offers. Buyer love letters. Are those things that you guys are dealing with?
Yes.
We try to discourage them because we think that they lead to potential for housing discrimination. And we go to the point that we're even recommending that you block out the names of people on the contract so that they cannot make any determination about the buyers. Other than that, we think that ought to be a true financial. But yeah, we're getting buyer letters all the time, and we do not present them to sellers.
Right. Well, that's, the concern, we get asked about these quite a bit on the legal hotline, and we discourage them as well. And we wrote there was actually Will years ago wrote an article in the Insight magazine about multiple offers, and one of the questions, or the true false or whatever, dealt with love letters, but recently, well, fairly recently, in October of last year, NAR added a little article on their website about love letters, and the title of it is Love Letters or Liability Letters. And they are risky. It's a fair housing issue, and they talk about before the next time you are faced with a buyer love letter, consider these best practices, and there are 6 of them, and I'll just read them off to you. I encourage you to follow these. Number 1, educate your clients about the fair housing laws and the pitfalls of buyer love letters. Number 2, inform your clients that you will not deliver buyer love letters and advise them that no buyer love letters will be accepted as part of an MLS listing. 3, remind your clients that their decision to accept or reject an offer should be based on objective criteria only. 4, if your clients insist on drafting a buyer love letter, do not help your clients draft or deliver it. 5, avoid reading any love letter drafted or received by your client. And 6, document all offers received and the seller's objective reason for accepting an offer. So, they are just sounding the alarm, fair housing risk alarm. And I mean, I know this is just one of the things that people are trying to do to have their offer stand out. Escalation clauses is another, but we really discourage both of those.
So when did it become discrimination to decide based on who a person is if you take out protected class issues? I don't understand that.
Well, no, protected class issues are what you're concerned about. I mean, so, but the
Well, how
problem
would a
is, like,
name of a
they had an
person-
example in a letter, we can just imagine our children running downstairs to see the Christmas tree. And, it sounds innocent enough, but really you're mentioning both family status and religion, allegedly, So you have to be careful when you draft these letters to not say, and I look, we are discouraging them. It sounds like, it's, what's the phrase for this, political correctness or something gone run amok. But we're just warning you, you need to be careful with these things. Yeah.
Bill,
Yeah.
Bill, I have a question about something else that I had seen recently, and
Okay.
would like to hear your thoughts on it. Having an attorney drafted addendum to present with the offer for one, either the appraisal difference, that they will make up the difference, and for as is condition, which is supposed to be anyway. So that a seller looking at their multiple offers may be more inclined to accept one where they feel like there's going to be less issues down the road.
Well, I got, Cub forwarded an email to me with some questions from one of you, and one of them was sort of on a similar point. I don't understand an addendum to a Form 2T that says they're willing to accept the property as is, because the contract already says the property is being sold as is. That I don't get. And, and then this whole idea of maybe adding an addendum that indicates that the buyer is willing to pay the appraised value, even if the appraised value is
Low.
low.
Pay
So-
the purchase price.
They'll pay
They
the
can still
they'll pay
quit.
the purchase price even if the appraisal is low. Well, even that, I mean, the contract says they're going to pay the purchase price. So adding an addendum that says they're going to pay the purchase price doesn't make a lot of sense to me. When you consider that, unless you're somehow limiting their due diligence rights. I mean, parties are able to terminate a contract during the due diligence period for any reason or no reason. So if they say they'll buy the property at the contract price, even if it appraises low, well, they could just terminate during the due diligence period and say, we decided we didn't like the color of the house. They can come up with anything. So is there any point to that kind of an addendum?
I think it clarifies to the seller that the buyer is willing to go beyond.
But are they?
No, it doesn't.
They don't
really
have to.
They don't have to, yeah.
They're
Yeah,
not
but I think
bound.
it's illusory. It's an illusory thing for them to say
Yeah.
that we'll pay the purchase price even if it appraises low. But how will you know? I mean, unless you're somehow like eliminating the due diligence
No,
period.
exactly, but it still sort of gives the buyer's agent a leg up when the seller sees that.
Absolutely.
Not if you tell the seller the truth. As
Yeah,
the listing agent,
You're
So-
saying they intend to do this. I mean, of course, they don't have to, but they may have a leg up to somebody who doesn't mention it at all.
Well,
yeah, I mean, if as a seller's
It's
agent,
illusory.
I would explain that that's not no more binding than anything to say.
Right.
They
True, but it tells a difference between the offerors.
right. So, listen, I think your question
not
is,
if you think of it objectively.
is it okay? Is it legal to have an attorney drafted addendum that says these things? The answer is yes. There's nothing illegal about it. And to the extent that that buyers might consider that it to make their offers look better, I guess, have at it. But listing agents ought to be aware that both things that you've suggested, as is and paying the price, regardless of the appraisal, are illusory.
But one of the things that we're seeing is the appraisers are not appraising the homes in time. So due diligence ends and then the appraisal comes in. And sometimes buyers are stuck, and it's like, we know it's not contingent upon a loan. The contract's not contingent upon a loan, but now they're being turned down because the home doesn't appraise. So we're running into that problem more often with that due diligence period because appraisers are just that busy. And I think that's why those letters have become so popular.
So let me ask you this then. So they say they're going to do it and the property comes in low. And so I wonder what they do. Do they buy the property even though the appraisal is low, or do they just give up their earnest money deposit?
Well, just the due diligence fee. Oh,
Just
you're
the-
saying after due diligence.
Yeah.
It's after the fact. So due diligence ends, but they have included this addendum to the contract.
Right. Well, but I mean,
But
how does it change what happens in reality? So the appraisal comes in low after the fact, and that buyer, just like that buyer has promised to pay the purchase price, just like every other buyer. And so they're faced with a low appraisal and they've promised to pay the purchase price, just like every other buyer, and they either do it or they don't. And if they don't, they lose the same earnest money deposit as every other buyer. I mean, I don't know how it.
Yeah, I see your
changes
point.
anything.
I see your point. Yeah.
Well, what they're doing is taking that off the table. What we see is when appraisals come in low, buyers want to negotiate.
Mhm.
And what they're saying with the addendum is, we're not going to negotiate this. And what I'm seeing in those as-is addendums is not just as is. They're saying, we're not going to seek any financial concession. So the sellers and the listing agent are feeling like this is going to happen and there's not going to be a whole lot of talk.
Well, what I have seen is rather than as is or a true as is contract, I have seen buyers that have been willing to waive the due diligence period by making it the due diligence end upon the acceptance or effective date of the contract, and they're not going to ask for repairs. They can still go ahead and do inspections and stuff. They're not going to ask for repairs. They're not going to worry about appraisal and whatnot. They certainly put themselves in a position that if they don't proceed, they're going to lose their earnest money and due diligence fee. But at the same time, it does make their offer look stronger. Hey, you know what? All the money I'm giving you right now, I'm putting at risk right now because we don't care what we find out about the property.
And I've got a few listings. I need those buyers to come by.
Hey,
My take on this is what Pat just described is the only real way to clad the contract from all this commotion. All of these addenda are effectively like letters of intent on a commercial deal. It's not a binding contract. It's just a gesture or an expression of our intent and our understanding that doesn't really mean anything because they can withdraw for any reason or no reason during due diligence, but at least it gives the seller that assurance. And Bill, from a practical practicing real estate standpoint, we're all jockeying for a way to differentiate our buyers in these multiple offer situations. And these are clever ways to do it, but they don't necessarily change the terms of the contract like you're saying.
Right. Well, and I, even though I think that it could be illusory, I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with it.
Right.
If you obviously don't draft these things, you don't want to be accused of unauthorized practice of law, but if you get an attorney to draft them, and it could even be like a proprietary form that if you're using it for buyers in multiple transactions, you could get an attorney to draft it and fill in the blank or something. I mean, you could use it multiple times, I would think. So yeah, it's like an escalation clause. We discourage those too, but we've created escalation clauses for clients that they use over and over and over again. So yeah, it's perfectly legal, and if it helps, I suppose, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. You won't listen to me even if I do.
I have a question about the as is phrase, and like it's in the standard language, right?
Right.
So how does that differentiate? And this is based on something Chuck Tebow told me long ago. How does that differentiate between, we're talking about the physical condition of the structure as is, and, we're talking about as is, it has deed defects, it has boundary disputes, it has whatever comes up. How does it parse out between those?
Well, no, I got to find the language, but there's still an obligation under the contract to provide good insurable marketable title, whatever the term is. What they're talking about is the property, the condition of the property.
Right. In the standard language, it's specified that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course I can't put my finger right on it.
Because what he told me was if somebody puts as is condition, you should tell your seller, don't ever sign that, because you're promising to give, the buyer, don't tell the buyer, you're promising to buy the property regardless of what conditions are as is. That was it. He said that becomes a new term of the contract that potentially obviates the necessity to convey good marketable title.
Right. Well,
what do you think of that?
Well, so the language that's in the contract, it doesn't say as is. It's paragraph 4D, which is entitled Repair Improvement Negotiations Agreement. Buyer acknowledges and understands that unless the parties agree otherwise, and then in capital letters, the property is being sold in its current condition. That's what we mean by an as-is clause. The property is being sold in its current condition. The language, if you're going to add, if you have an attorney draft something over and above that, you clearly, if you're a buyer, you want to make sure that the language doesn't somehow relieve the seller from the obligation to provide good title.
And I'm sorry, if I may, that language is under the heading of repair improvement negotiations and agreement. So it's got nothing to do with anything that would affect title.
Right.
To me, that would be strictly.
When you write it in without all that conditioning language, it
Right.
could be a different animal. When someone writes it into an addendum and it's not saying it's part of the physical inspection stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could be something, right. That's the problem with brokers drafting stuff, is it can lead to ambiguity. What does it mean if you say the property is being sold as is? Does it mean, if there are easements, you're accepting the easements,
Right.
or the encroachments?
Exactly.
Yeah,
That
it could
was
be a
what-
problem. So, yeah, you got to be careful, especially if you're a buyer.
That brings up a really interesting question that I have. With something that can't close because you have not disclosed that there are easements that could really impact what the client wants to use this property for example. Or, you've got parties that aren't agreeing to the closing that should have been named on the, that should have signed off on the listing. Anything like that, it's not a material fact, and yet it's a material fact. I don't understand how we can, my camera was off, I'm sorry. Don't understand how we can move forward without disclosing those kinds of things. Originally.
Well, if it affects title, my guess, if it's an encroachment or an easement that impacts the buyer's ability to use the property, I think that is a material fact. It has to be disclosed. And I think it would affect the ability to insure title. Certainly encroachments are considered a cloud on title.
So you're saying that because I had always thought it was a material fact. We were told by an attorney recently that no, that is not a material fact.
Well, I think it's fact specific. It depends on what it is. If there's a utility easement underneath your property, and there's a water line or a sewer line that runs underneath your property that's owned by the municipality, that may not rise to the level of a material fact or a cloud on title, but other things could be. So
Mhm.
it's hard
So
to answer.
would the seller be in violation of contract? I mean, if you get down to the day before closing and you find out something like that, and you've got your due diligence plus your earnest money now at risk, and you decide that your client decides that they're going to walk away, should they be getting their due diligence back?
Well, again, let's assume that there was a material fact that was not disclosed, or concealed. It was concealed in some way. There's always the argument that the buyer was induced to enter into the contract in the first place because significant information was not disclosed. And if, I can't tell you it's a winner every time,
Mhm.
but the buyer certainly has an argument that they're entitled not only to they're entitled to recover everything, earnest money, due diligence, inspection costs, the whole bit. But they have to be able to prove that they were induced to enter into the contract at the beginning because of a concealment of a material fact. And what constitutes a material fact is fact specific, really.
Bill, can I ask you a quick follow-up on the as is? What about as is, where is?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure there's much of a distinct or much of a difference on anything we've discussed before. I think it could lead to some ambiguity in terms of those words. You're talking about adding an addendum that says as is, where is, the property sold as is, where is.
Yeah, it's common in REO and bank stuff. That's a common term they use. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not moving anything. It is what it is. It is where it is. I mean, and again, I think it's maybe gray on what it's interpreted as, but does that change anything with encroachments or, insurable title or?
Well, those REO contracts, they don't usually use our standard forms, right? They don't use our Form 2T. So, I'm not sure what kind of warranty of title you get when you buy a house out of foreclosure. In fact, sometimes you're not, a bank that's foreclosing on liens they're only foreclosing on junior liens. You very well may be buying property subject to existing liens. Isn't that right? I mean, that's something that a buyer, I'm sure, has to investigate before closing. Isn't that right? I believe.
Yeah, several REO properties I've sold have indicated they would not convey title by general warranty deed, but would do it by a special warranty deed, that sort of thing like that. So they're limiting the their liability for title, I guess.
Right.
Another question about multiple offers, if I can.
Sure. Yeah, we may never get to the other two subjects.
I was going to say, I knew multiple
Okay.
offers would take up most of the time, but yeah.
Go ahead, Pat.
What do you do about, what is your opinion about agents who set deadlines to submit offers? Real life scenario, offers set for, we're going to review offers Monday at noon, and the seller receives 7 offers on Friday and says, I just want to go ahead and accept one of these. I don't want to keep the house on the market anymore. I've got 22 appointments scheduled for Saturday and Sunday, and I just want to go ahead and accept one of these offers. What position does that put the agent in terms of what they presented in terms of to other agents about accepting an offer now, even though we haven't got to the deadline?
I'm sorry, can I add on to that?
Yes.
Sure.
And what if someone puts an offer in with an expiration of offer before that time period?
Yeah.
I bet this question has come up before, and I just wonder how either one of my law partners might have answered it in the past. I think that you have to, the listing agent has to be careful about what he puts out there for buyer agents. Needs to have an understanding with his seller client as to what they are asking for and committing to. I think the way you phrased your question, it sounds to me they said, there's a deadline for submitting offers Monday at 5 o'clock, doesn't necessarily indicate to anyone that the seller might not accept an offer before Monday at 5 o'clock.
Right.
It just says, but then again, if you put out there, seller will consider any offers received until 5 o'clock on Monday, then I think the seller would be putting the listing agent in a very tough position if they accepted an offer before 5 o'clock, because he's committed to considering every offer received up until that time. So I think you have to be careful about that, about what you put out there to the buyer agents.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I don't think the seller would normally be prohibited from accepting an offer before a deadline, as long as the deadline was expressed in the right way.
All right. Cool.
Bill, could you hold the offers for the 3 days and present them then, as long as you're presenting them within 3 days? And that was known by all parties?
I think the real estate commission would say your obligation as an agent is to submit all offers immediately, promptly. You're legally permitted to hold them for 3 days, but they believe that you should be submitting all offers as soon as you get them, as soon as you can.
Brett, what if you were to receive an offer that was, say, $50,000 over on a $300,000 list price that had an expiration of offer of 6 hours? Would you withhold that for a few days until the deadline?
No, you can't. Absolutely
Well,
not.
that's why you've got to be careful with that. Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you and the sellers are agreeing to a timeline to run, it does seem like it's the fairest to all parties and everyone knows. And then you run that as long as you're in line with the real estate commission's guidelines of 3 days.
So are you working in my
John.
argument would be, are you working in your seller's best interest if you have to do that and it's going to cost them what might be the best offer?
But if you didn't let it run, then maybe they got one for 75 or 100 or 125 over list.
Maybe.
So give the
But the first one had expiration date.
An expiration of offer. I think you've got to present to your seller and let them make that call.
But in this market, do you feel that they won't come back?
Again, are you willing to, as a seller, are you willing to take that risk?
Well, but Brett, I had a buyer who did that identical thing, and the idea was, and they said, you know what, we're tired of losing out, and we're not going to wait until Monday. We want to know today, or we're going to, or we're not going to play this game.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm having more and more buyers get very adamant about wanting answers now, and not wanting to be jerked around. And we're making a really good offer. we're making it, we're putting, all the bells and whistles, the high due diligence, and we want a decision today, or we're not going to play the game. Now, that doesn't mean that the seller won't get a better offer than that, but they can be real serious about not wanting to play the game. So,
Offering incoming soon.
well, yeah.
I can't believe, any of us that have been in this business for 15 years or so probably can't believe that we're having these conversations. I mean, this is.
Well, the problem that we're seeing is particularly in the sweet spot, the price range where everybody and their brother wants those homes, 40 offers coming in over a period of 3 or 4 days drives the sellers crazy. And they're saying, just hold everything and present it all at once, and we'll look at it all at once.
Right.
And in fact, for our meeting tomorrow, we're going to be actually presenting in our attachments for our members who attend that meeting, a spreadsheet. So, you get 40 offers, the seller's agent is possibly going to miss something important. Putting it all on a spreadsheet and handing it to the sellers so they can see it all at once seems to be the most fair way of handling it. If you do get an offer that has a date on it that's earlier, though, I think that it behooves you. I mean, you have to present it because you have an expiration date. But everything else can go on the spreadsheet, and even the one that is reviewed beforehand, could go on that same spreadsheet, even if they turn it down. It's just so that they can see everything at a glance. And I think, again, if I'm not mistaken, we have to go with what our sellers are telling us to do, as long as we're not breaking the law or doing something that's unethical.
And I think that's right, Jessica. I agree with that. I mean, if you got a seller that says, I got stuff I got to do this weekend, just hold everything until Monday. Yeah, you won't be, the real estate commission is not going to get on you if you do what the seller asks you to do.
Right.
There's also some good, the 340T form, seller response to an offer, does give you lots of flexibility in terms of the second category is there where you actually say, the seller says, as part of the response, we're going to be considering all offers at such and such a time, is one of the choices, I think, in 340-T.
Well, again, I think that the main thing that we're all talking about is transparency and to err on the side of caution.
Yeah. Well, I think obviously I knew the multiple offers would take most of the time, but we have 2 other things that we at least will touch on. I think the DOJ NAR thing won't be quite as long, but and maybe the monies won't either. So, but Bill,
I'm happy to. Steve, you have a preference which one I cover first?
well, since we're dealing with these multiple offers and all that, and I don't think the language of the settlement has been figured out as far as I know anyway. Why don't you go to monies? Since we're, so if you happen to win one of these multiple offer situations, you got to get them the money.
Right. So I guess when I talked to Steve, I'm trying to remember how you phrased it, the questions that came up. You said, the due diligence fee is due on the effective date, but it doesn't happen a lot. What's reasonable? What about using Form 355? So,
and what are acceptable forms of payment?
And acceptable forms of payment. Yeah, that was another issue too. I mean, and so acceptable forms of payment. Let me cover that one first. Steve raised the issue of brought up Venmo and Bitcoin, and Steve said his thought was that look, the parties can agree on anything they want, but then what do you do if they don't agree? Let me first put something to rest. Bitcoin doesn't work. I don't know what Bitcoin even is. I can't wrap my head around it. But the contract says that in paragraph 1D says the purchase price is paid in US dollars. So unless you modify the contract, the price is paid in US dollars, not in Bitcoin.
Or
And hopefully
yen.
that's not going to change in my lifetime. So the second is, except for the due diligence fee, the contract is very specific on how all payments are supposed to be made. So, in the initial earnest money deposit, there are check boxes where the parties identify how the initial earnest money is going to be paid. Is it going to be cash? Personal check is permitted, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer. Additional earnest money, there's a laundry list. It says how you can pay any additional earnest money, either by cash, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer. Those are all permissible forms of payment. And the balance of the purchase price is paid in cash, is what it says. That's what the contract says. And further, if the buyer fails to pay either the due diligence money or the initial earnest money by their due date, paragraph 1D is very specific that the seller can give notice, written notice, and then it sets forth when and how the buyer needs to make those payments. And they got to do it within one banking day, and they've got to deliver cash, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer. So personal check is not permitted if they're late. Okay. So all of that is specified. The only way this should be an issue to me is the due diligence money. The forms committee, this is, I don't know if there's anybody on this call that's on the forms committee, but here's a news flash. The forms committee is aware of this problem, and they have proposed, or they are considering, new language for Form 2T, which is going to address this. And I have every reason to suspect that these changes will be accepted by the Joint Forms Committee and the board, or whoever it is that blesses these changes. But if the change gets made, there will now be check boxes for due diligence fee that provides that it'll be paid either by cash, personal check, official bank check, wire transfer, or electronic transfer. And in the box for electronic transfer, there's going to be additional language that says specify payment service. So in the contract, the parties will agree if the buyer wants to use Venmo. And, this is going to be an increasing issue that comes up. You guys are probably already aware of this, but like kids, not just kids, lots of people that are a lot younger than me, they don't have checking accounts. Everybody does everything by Venmo or Zelle or something. Like my daughter wrote me a check a couple of months ago, and it was her check number 1. She had never written a check. She's had this checking account for years. She Venmos me all the time, but she actually, for some reason, wrote me a check. So it's going to be covered soon. July 1, I think this will be out there. So we won't have to worry about it. This is a short-term problem. But so what do we do until then? Like Steve says, hopefully the parties agree on this kind of stuff. But if not, our view is the buyer can pay the due diligence fee any way they want. There's no limit on how they pay that money. They can pay it in rolls of pennies. They can do it by Venmo. Any way they want seems acceptable to me. So that's on the manner of payment. What about timing of payment? That's the other issue. Due diligence money is not being paid on time. Sometimes it's not being paid at all. Buyers make they get cold feet after they sign their contract. What's reasonable? Well, the contract is specific. The due diligence money is due on the effective date of the contract. The effective date is the date on which it's signed by the last party, and the fact of the signing is communicated. And if the parties, sign the contract and it's communicated at 9 a.m, they've got till 11:59 at night to deliver the due diligence fee. So I'd say if you're a buyer agent, you should do everything you can to have a due diligence check in hand, or arrangements with your buyer, if they're going to do Venmo or something, figure that out at the time you submit an offer, because there's always a chance that the offer is going to be accepted and you're going to be on the clock. Now, there's a grace period. You've got that 1 day after receiving written notice. But, if you're a listing agent, what's reasonable, it's reasonable to rely on what the contract says. They should be paying it on the effective date. And if they, if your seller wants that due diligence money, the sooner you can get your hands on it, the better. You provide the written notice if they don't do it on the effective date. If you want to give them a day or two, that's fine. But there's a form, it's a fairly new form, I think, Form 355, that is a written notice form. It can be signed by the sellers, and it demands payment within 1 banking day, just like the contract says. And it specifies the forms of payment, and I would encourage listing agents to send it. I don't know if you got much interest in this. I don't know how much this comes up, but we get calls a lot on the hotline and from people involved in transactions where the buyer signs a contract, they're the successful bidder, and then the next day they change their mind. They say, I don't want to buy this property, and they don't want to pay the due diligence money, and they wonder whether they've got to pay it. Like, they think somehow, I don't know what they think, that there's, they've got the right to terminate during the due diligence period, and so they can go ahead and terminate, and somehow they don't have the right, they don't have the obligation to pay the due diligence money. Well, that's just wrong. That's just flat out wrong. They have an obligation. They don't have the right. We've suggested in the past, they don't even have the right to terminate the contract during the due diligence period unless they pay the due diligence fee. When they terminate during the due diligence period, the advantage of that is they don't have to pay the earnest money deposit. But if they don't pay the due diligence fee, they don't have the right to terminate. They theoretically lose not only their due diligence fee, or they're not only liable for their due diligence fee, they're liable for the earnest money deposit as well. And if the seller files a lawsuit, they're also liable for attorney fees. And there is and I'm going to be writing a Q&A this week. It's going to be published on Monday in the Realtor Report about a decision by the North Carolina Court of Appeals that was issued December 31 of 2020, last year. Now, this is an unpublished decision, which means that can't be cited as precedent. But it's and actually it's on appeal to the North Carolina Supreme Court, but it has exactly those facts where a buyer, and it's actually out of Wake County. Hopefully nobody on this call is involved in that, but it's the buyer didn't pay their due diligence fee. They tried to terminate. The seller asked for the money. The seller terminated and sued. And in front of a magistrate in a small claims court, the magistrate awarded the due diligence fee, but did not award the earnest money deposit. And the buyer was upset with that result and appealed it to the district court, which they have an automatic right to appeal. That was the worst decision they ever made, because the district court decided that not only did the buyer owe the due diligence fee, they owed a $2,500 earnest money deposit. He awarded $4,500 in prejudgment interest, and I don't know how on earth he calculated that, but he also awarded over $13,000 in attorney fees. And so the judgment against the buyer was for $22,000, and that went up on appeal, and the Court of Appeals affirmed the district court's ruling. Now, the attorney fees award, there was a 2-to-1 decision. There was a dissenting judge that said the attorney fees should never have been awarded, and they were excessive. And I think there may be some merit to that, and that's what I think the Supreme Court is going to issue a decision on. But meanwhile, in our new Form 2T in July, all of this is going to be addressed again, and we're going to make it very clear that if the buyer doesn't pay the due diligence fee, the seller's remedy is not only to be able to recover the due diligence money, but also the earnest money deposit.
Hey, Bill, can I ask a follow-up question? This is Randy Cox.
Sure.
And it really is related to that very thing, but where the agent gets put in the middle. And in other words, there's a contract, it's signed, the agent is a courier and has the due diligence money in their possession. And they then are instructed, because the buyer changes their mind and says, give me my due diligence fee. I don't want you to deliver it. And in the meantime, the seller is sitting there saying, along with the listing agent, where's my due diligence money? And the agents are going back and forth, and our buyer's agent says, I'm being instructed to go ahead and deliver the due diligence money back to my buyer. They're going to terminate the contract. Where does all that stand?
Randy, I mean, that's a great question. We get it on the hotline a lot. Here's what's really interesting about that. There is a real estate commission rule that says that if you are an agent and you are holding a check, a buyer's due diligence check, and the buyer requests that you return it to them, you have to return it to them. And what's interesting about that is that rule doesn't just apply to the buyer agent, it also applies to the listing agent. So let's say you're the buyer agent and you've delivered that check, the due diligence check, to the listing agent, and the listing agent hasn't sent it to their seller client yet. The listing agent, you would think they would have to give that money to the seller. The seller is entitled to that money. But the real estate commission rule says no, they've got to return it to the buyer. Now, this Q&A that I'm writing that you'll see next Monday ends with this. And actually the lesson there is that if you're a buyer agent and you get due diligence money, give it to the seller or the listing agent as soon as you can. And if you're a listing agent and you get due diligence money, give it to the seller as soon as you can before anybody asks for the money back. Okay. But the way I end this Q&A is the lesson for buyer agents who have a client who refuses to pay a due diligence fee. They should inform their client that there are substantial risks associated with refusing to pay the due diligence fee, and they should think twice before deciding to pursue that course of action. I mean, they should think more than twice. You know, so if you're a buyer agent and you get a request to return that money, you should tell the buyer about this case that I just told you about, where they subject themselves to huge financial risk if they don't pay the due diligence money. But if they tell you to return it, you return it. You got no choice.
Thank you. Can I make one other comment? I may have to get off the call, and this is for all the brokers in charge. I do know that there is going to be some written decision coming from the Real Estate Commission as it relates to escalation clauses and their position on it. Not sure how that's going to read or what that's going to read, but we've been in some lengthy conversation with the Real Estate Commission to voice an opinion and to document it to everybody involved in our business. And so just be on the lookout for that. It's supposed to come out, I'm thinking in the next bulletin, but just be on the lookout for that.
And let me use that let me segue into one of the questions that Cub sent me this morning had to do with escalation clauses. And I mentioned earlier that I would talk about them a little bit. The question that we got, is it legal for buyers to submit offers in multiple offer situations with the clause that they will pay X amount over the highest offer? You know, we refer to that as an escalation clause. And the answer to the question is yes, we believe it is legal. However, we discourage the use of escalation clauses. And as I think I mentioned earlier, even though we discourage them, we've drafted them because people want them, people use them. And and there are good escalation clauses and there are bad ones. You know, there are ways to try to make them as good as possible.
Is it legal to also demand to see somebody else's offer?
No,
Which they do.
Well, you can demand it, but like I said earlier, for a broker, you cannot disclose the terms of a competing offer. And the issue is, okay, let's say there's an escalation clause and somebody with an escalation clause is the winning bid. They're the successful buyer. We've taken the position in the past that we don't think that the buyer, the losing buyer is any more a competing offer. There's no more competition. The competition is over. You know, in our view, but we're not the real estate commission. So our view is maybe irrelevant, but our view is it would be okay to at least reveal the price that the competing offer was. The real estate commission has never said that. What the real estate commission has told us recently is the best way to handle that is you as the listing broker shouldn't disclose anything about the competing offer. Let your client do it. Let the seller tell the successful buyer what the offer price was. You know, if you want, black out the names, black out everything else, but, you know, put in the price, show the price, whatever they want to do, but don't do it as the listing agent. Let me go ahead. We got that. Look, it's crazy advice, but it came right from one of the attorneys of the real estate commission whose name will not be mentioned. Let me just tell you a couple of reasons why we discourage the use of these things. So if you're going to submit an escalation clause, and let's say I'm going to say arbitrarily, we offer $1,000 more than the highest competing offer. Well, if you are going to submit a clause like that, you have to, if you're representing a buyer, put a ceiling on that. Your buyer doesn't want to offer $1 million for the property if somebody else is crazy enough to offer $999,000 for it. So you're going to have to say, I'm willing to offer $1,000 more than the highest offer with a maximum price of X. If you don't put that in your escalation clause, you're making a mistake. The problem is if you put that price in your escalation clause, the seller's going to know the most that you're willing to pay for the property. And it seems to me that any seller in their right mind would counter that offer by saying, okay, I'll sell you the property for that price. And so you're not really accomplishing anything, it seems to me. That's the biggest concern I have with it. What are the other concerns? How do you know, as the agent for buyer one, that the competing offer that caused your client to pay whatever they pay is really a legitimate offer? How do you know that that offer wasn't cooked up by the seller? The seller got their neighbor to write an offer, you know, it looks legitimate. How do you know? I mean, I'm not suggesting that there are any listing agents out there that would cook up a competing offer. That would never happen. But we know that there are sellers out there that might do that. So that's a problem. The other thing is, you know that you're competing, you're saying I'm going to pay $1,000 more than another competing offer. But what about the other terms of the offer other than price? What about financing? What about closing date? What about down payment? What about earnest money deposit? You know, how do you know that the other offer that you're competing with is really, you know, you're comparing apples to apples? You don't really know that. So, you know, that I just think that there's reasons to avoid them. But then again, you know, if you've got to make your offer stand out, we don't think we would say they are not illegal. They are legal. And I mean, Randy's comment earlier that the real estate commission is going to come out with guidance. I mean, I'd be shocked if they came out and said, you can't use these things.
Yeah, their language, it appears, and Roger Bernholtz says, has sort of bird dog that. I'm sure you're familiar with Roger and what he does for our company, but the way the language appears to be coming out is that it's going to be gray. They are going to try and at least help us so that we can help the greater community, real estate community, in how we should manage them. And I think we'll be able to have some better dialogue. Right now, I think the way things go is you got some that say perfectly fine to use them. No, you shouldn't use them. It's perfectly fine to use them. And it goes back and forth. And then there is the premise that in a listing agent accepting the fact that an escalation clause is being used by someone representing a buyer is in fact pulling a listing agent into something that may or may not be permissible. And so you can see where it's got a lot of gray to it. It's just uncertain. And I think we need better clarity.
I'll be interested. I
Oops.
didn't realize that Roger was talking to the real estate commission about that, but yeah, it'll be good because they really never have put out much in the way of guidance on this stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
It creates such an unfair playing field for firms that don't allow it.
I think the conversation in our firm has been even with some attorneys that in general, it's seemingly okay for the buyer's agent to submit, but by a listing agent accepting it, they are disclosing terms, right, of the other offer. So I think it's been our position to counter, like you mentioned, the offer regardless of any escalation clause. Like, here's our counter, escalation clause notwithstanding, something like that.
Right. Let me, I'm going to change the subject one last time and just give you a brief, I'll give you a brief summary of what I understand about this DOJ settlement, Steve, if you want.
Great. Yeah, I think that's good. We don't,
Steve asked me to
running out
talk
of
about it,
time.
and I got to admit, I knew that there was something. I knew there was something out there, but I knew absolutely nothing about it. I had to learn about it. It turns out it was announced in November that there was an agreement between NAR and the Department of Justice, and they said that it was the result of questions that the DOJ had regarding the multiple listing service and commissions. And DOJ is, it's a consumer. This is a consumer-oriented thing. They're trying to protect consumers, and of course, we'd like to think that our code of ethics and our MLS is pro-consumer, pro-competition. And when NAR came out in November and announced this thing, they said, well, the changes that it's the agreement that we reached that NAR reached required NAR to make some changes both to MLS rules and the code of ethics. And NAR sold it in November saying, we really don't think we are giving up anything. These changes are all consistent with the tenor and spirit of the code of ethics and our MLS rules. And they haven't changed that tune. They said that the rules would be issued within 45 days, which, they announced this thing, I think, on November 19th. So that should have been right at the end of the year. Well, when I went on the NAR website, there's actually a 5-minute video that was put up there last Thursday, the 25th of February, and there's still no proposed rules yet. And it's a 5-minute video, which I would encourage you to watch it if you've got a real interest in this thing. But the one thing to tell you is that none of this has gone into effect yet. In order for there to be changes, there has to be an agreement between NAR and DOJ on what these rule changes will be. And then there has to be an approval of these rule changes by the NAR board of directors. And then they have to be approved by a court. And none of that has happened yet. This video, they say that it's probably the NAR directors will be asked to review it sometime this spring. Well, we're not quite yet in spring, and spring runs until June. So who knows when this is going to happen, but they're basically 4 changes. And in summary, one of them is offers of compensation, and they're talking about to buyer agents, has to be disclosed. Real estate transactions cannot be advertised as free. That's number 2. Number 3, MLS listings cannot be filtered based on commission amount or on the name of the listing broker. And number 4, lockbox access must now be available to all licensed real estate professionals, not just realtors, not just members of an MLS. So on this, on the brokerage commissions, my understanding is that IDX and VOW policies now allow you to put compensation field as confidential. That's no longer going to be allowed. MLS sheets are going to be required to disclose buyer agent commissions. The requirement that buyer agents disclose to their clients their buyer agent commission, we already have a rule in North Carolina that requires that. That's a real estate commission rule, but that rule apparently does not exist in many states. So the requirement to disclose commissions to your clients is not a change here. On the second point, not advertising is free. There's already a standard of practice on this. So Article 12 of the Code of Ethics is the advertising article, and standard of practice 12-1 already talks about the use of the term free and limits how that can be used. And so it's going to be somehow changed to probably make it even, basically, so I don't think you're going to be able to advertise as free. And I don't know how many buyer agents are out there doing that, I think agents do it. I think buyer agents do tell their clients, well, you should hire me because it's not going to cost you anything. But I don't think you're going to be able to do that anymore. I think you're going to have to be able to say, well, yeah, I'm going to get compensated, and I'm going to be compensated by the listing agent, and the listing agent is going to get that compensation from the seller. And so it's all baked into the price. You're not going to be able to say you're doing it for nothing. This filtering of listings, the idea here is that brokers need to be acting in the best interest of their clients. They need to be able to show, make their clients aware of all listings that might be interesting to them, not just the ones that are offering a certain percentage commission, or not only, you can't just show listings that are being offered by your firm. You've got to show them everything or something, that's my understanding of the rule change. And then the whole lockbox thing, that may be a fairly significant change. I don't know how lockboxes really work all that well, but they are going to be, you're going to have to provide access. MLS is going to have to provide access to all licensees, and they are going to allow certain rules so that lockbox providers can require confirmation of their licensee status. They can require all these licensees to sign a lockbox agreement. They can require appropriate security precautions. They can require fees be paid. But changes are coming on the lockbox. John?
My understanding on that was that there's going to be a discussion. Well, although the thing says that all licensees will have access, that's going to be with seller's permission.
That's true. I should have pointed that out. That's correct, John, with the seller's permission. Yeah, sellers don't have to put a lockbox in their house, but if there is a lockbox, it's got to be available. It's got to be accessible by all licensees, not just MLS.
The seller's not going to be able to restrict whether it's a licensee or a realtor.
Correct.
Okay.
Probably reasonably.
That's my understanding, John. That's my understanding. I guess we have to wait to see what the proposed rule is.
But it wouldn't guarantee a compensation agreement nonetheless. Somebody.
Correct.
No. That's a whole different issue. So that's all I got. And it's 12:59.
You hit it right on the button. We're right at the end. This is, on behalf of everyone, I hope everyone feels the same way. Bill, this has been terrific. We really appreciate you coming here today. We're coming on Zoom with us, and there's a lot going on, and this has been great.
Well, happy to do it. I encourage any of you who have follow-up questions, get in touch with us on the legal hotline.
I have a question that has nothing to do with this. Where are you from in New York?
I'm from a little place called Old Brookville on the North Shore of Long Island.
Yes, I'm from Levittown.
Okay.
And I came down.
That's not far.
I
I'm
came
a
down here
Nassau
sort of
County
like
guy.
you.
Huh?
I went to college at Duke and I didn't go back.
Yeah, well, I made it to North Carolina, and it took me 16 years in Chicago to realize I didn't belong there and I belong back here. So y'all take care.
There
Thank
you go.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.
Cub wanted me to tell you that the multiple offer protocol on 3/4, that's tomorrow, and then how to stay off the back of the bulletin on 3/25. So,
What are you saying? You've lost me.
well, there's Realtor Roundtable tomorrow at 10 a.m. that's going to discuss more multiple offer stuff. And then on 3/25, I don't know who's going to do that. Who is that, Cub? Or Jessica? Who's keeping us off the back of the bulletin?
That's the Real Estate Commission.
Oh, okay, good. So someone from the Real Estate Commission is going to keep us off.
And the Realtor Roundtable tomorrow is going to be very interactive. We're going to have breakout rooms to hear from our agents and discuss some of these issues a little bit more. Maybe, come to some sort of agreement on, whether not telling people how to run their business, but,
Cool.
what we are seeing and, the problems associated with it.
So I missed it. If there's invitations for that Zoom, I missed it. Does that go to everybody or?
Well, Jay, you were excluded.
We kept Jay
The
out.
rest of us all got
It was
it.
everyone
The Jay
else.
rule.
But, Cub said, don't invite Jay.
Yeah. No, it went out on the Monday. It's been out. We've had several
Okay,
announcements, but yeah, check your Monday weekly.
so that would be the one that comes from Cub. It says
And
Cub.
Ashley.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Okay, we'll see you
there
tomorrow.
you go. Thanks a
Good to
lot.
see you, everybody.
Have a good afternoon.